Thank you so much for coming this evening to Fenimore Art Museum for this very, very special presentation. I'm thrilled to be introducing this person because I've had the chance to work with her here at the museum for many years. I'm Kevin Gray, I'm manager of arts education here. And it's been wonderful to see the progress of this exhibition just kind of formulate over the past 3 years that she's been working on this incredible exhibition, Mary Cassatt, Berthe Morisot, Allies in Impressionism. Hopefully, many of you have already gone upstairs at some point this summer to see the exhibit. If you haven't, there will be an opportunity tonight following the lecture. There's also an opportunity to purchase the catalog for the exhibition. And it's important to note that this exhibition is strictly, exclusively here at Fenimore Art Museum. So this is the only place you can see the show. This is the only place where you can get the catalog. And Ann Cannon will be happy to sign your catalog after the talk, if you wish. So let me introduce everybody to our very, very important speaker tonight. Ann Cannon is Curator of American Art here at Fenimore Art Museum. She's been with the museum for 7 years now. She double majored in art history and French, the perfect combination for this exhibit, at Hartwick College. And she has an MA in the history of art and architecture with a certificate in museum studies from Boston University. And we also see her as the art nerd extraordinaire here at Fenimore Art Museum. We're so happy that you're here. We're so happy that you're here. And without any further ado, Ann Cannon, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Hi, everybody. You ready to talk about some art? Awesome. All right. So it's kind of silly that this is the last of our lecture series because it really probably should have been the first. Because what I'm going to be doing tonight is kind of walking you all through the circumstances that kind of helped to create the Impressionist movement. It was the right place at the right time in Paris, and it's a little confusing for those who don't understand everything that was going on in France at that time. So that's what I'm going to try to explain, while also throwing in some really pretty paintings. Alrighty. So to begin, it's really important to talk about how art was seen in France before the 1870s and into the early 20th century. The only way that you really could see paintings at this time was at the French Salon, which was this very strict, rigid, stuffy, as you can see in this painting, very crammed full way of displaying artworks. And these ranged from historical paintings to paintings of portraits, genre painting, landscape, and still life in hierarchy depending on the importance, with history paintings being the most important thing. And when I say history paintings, I'm talking about paintings of mythological scenes, historical events, anything having to do with Napoleon, because everybody was obsessed with Napoleon at this period. You have a complex, everybody's obsessed with you. Anyway, and it was a very rigidly judged system. Usually it was the aristocracy who was deciding which pieces would be going into the show, potentially artists who were, with favor of the king or the emperor at the time. So it was very difficult for artists to make it into the salon. There was a lot of roadblocks in their way, and they only liked the things that they liked, unfortunately. So of course, because I talk about Napoleon, most 101 courses that talk about 19th century art bring up this painting, which is just a ridiculous painting in and of itself, Napoleon on horseback crossing the Alps by Jacques-Louis David, which is just a complete fabrication. He never actually crossed the Alps like that. He was on the back of a donkey. But that wouldn't make a good painting, right? That would just look weird. He wanted to be heroic, so this is basically one of the first really great instances of political propaganda that we have in art history, and it's just so ridiculous. So this is basically what people were used to. You can tell here too, David's brushwork, you can't really see it. It's almost photographic in the way that he's handling the paint. A very finished surface, and that's really what people liked. They didn't like to see how a painting was made pre 1860s. So we cut to, additional pieces here that people would have been familiar with, used to seeing. Stuff that kind of started to appear within this period is realist paintings, like Millet's Sower here, where you're looking and seeing a peasant. That wouldn't have been something people wanted to see. Ew, peasants, gross. We just want to see Napoleon on his horse. And this is Burial at Ornans by Courbet, which is a massive genre painting, which again, if we think of the hierarchy, genre paintings were really low down there, right? So people thought of genre paintings as little teeny tiny things. This painting is about the size of this wall. So that was probably the first big shock to the system that they felt, but it was still kind of acceptable. He still hid his brushwork. It was still kind of a calm scene. In 1863, everything changed. There was a massive amount, maybe over half of the paintings that had been, put forth to be entered into the Salon that year were rejected, and it was outrage. Everybody was freaking out. Edouard Manet, who many know from many of his works, we've got two of them here, was one of the artists who had been rejected, and so many people were outraged by that they protested. And the emperor at the time, Napoleon III, decided that, if people are going to make this big of a deal about it, maybe we should just put them all on display so that people understand why this art sucks. Thinking, oh yes, we'll do like a freak show type thing. Everybody will understand why the Salon decided to just totally not show any of these because they're not good enough in their opinions. But that kind of backfired. It became one of the largest, most popular art exhibitions up until that point in history, mostly because of that kind of freak show element of people being like, oh, we can't look away, we want to see what happened. But also because the art was good. These two works are now at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. You can see here Manet is starting to loosen up the brushworks. He's got these really interesting areas of shadowing where he's not blending in the faces, and that really freaked some people out. They thought she looked dirty. My favorite fun fact about the Whistler here, Whistler is an American artist who had started exhibiting in Paris at this time, is that he gave himself lead poisoning painting that because of how much white paint he used. Talk about really being committed to your art, right? Wild. And that piece is now at the National Gallery. This one I think they rejected because it's a portrait, but he's not naming the sitter here, which was a no-no at the time. If you wanted it to be accepted into portraiture, you had to tell people who it was. It was also his mistress, so that might have also touchy. Anyway, this is a caricature of the Salon des Refusés. So you can see just how many paintings, they filled an entire space with these works, hung all the way up. Here are the two Manets. Here's the Whistler, and then we're going to talk about this one in the middle, which was the big painting that everybody talks about when they talk about the Salon des Refusés, and that is Manet's Luncheon on the Grass. Do we think people liked it? No. We do. We like it now. But imagine, you're used to paintings of Napoleon, and all of a sudden, there's this beautiful large painting with these two clothed men in a park with this totally naked lady staring you right down. She's looking directly out at you. Audacious. It's also helpful to know in this period in the 1860s, the parks in Paris were kind of well known and synonymous with prostitution. So a naked lady in the park, ... But this was the piece that everybody was kind of fascinated by. They wanted to see, what is this Manet painting everybody's talking about with this naked lady? What's going on? And that's what really started to make the other artists in the area and in the room who came to see these paintings think about different ways that they could start to create art, how they could loosen up their brushwork, how they could be looking at different types of scenes in the city instead of just, the nobility and, a pretty garden party. They could start to get grittier. They could start to loosen things up, shake things up. And they realized that if they wanted to do that, they couldn't be doing it at the Salon, which is why Manet was kind of the lodestone for the Impressionists, who went off to figure out how they could exhibit independently. But before we get into that, it's important to also note the connection to Manet and Morisot, one of the two women that I discussed in the exhibition upstairs. So aside from eventually being linked through marriage, Morisot and Manet kind of met as two bourgeois Parisians would at a dinner party. That's typically where he would find people he wanted to paint, and he ended up using her as a model throughout the 1860s. She kind of learned a little bit from him in how to handle paint, how to set up compositions, and she might have had a little bit of a crush on him, but you know, that didn't quite work out for her, but she did end up marrying his brother. So, almost the same thing, right? So these are just two works in which we have Morisot posing for Manet. Sorry, that got cut off. This is at the Art Institute of Chicago. And this is one of the most well-known portraits of her by Manet. I figured it'd be fun to put up a picture because everybody likes pictures of these people. They were real, there's photos of them. But Morisot had a very distinctive face, very sharp brow, and that's kind of what Manet liked about her. He was kind of one of the first to look at women who may not have been classically perceived as attractive. Maybe there was some interesting harshness that he liked to kind of utilize in his paintings. Here he's actually softened the brow quite a bit, and she's looking very demure, sophisticated. If anybody was at Justine de Young's lecture 2 weekends ago, she talks about the importance of black in dress and how in art history in this period in France, we can kind of figure out the status of the sitter based on what they're wearing. So because Morisot is depicted in black, that means that she is considered a Parisienne, which is an upper-class bourgeois wealthy woman, which helped her out quite a bit when she decided she wanted to become an artist. She already had that kind of infrastructure in place financially to transition herself into that role. She's a really funny one because she did end up marrying, but she was so against marriage, you almost would have thought she would be like Cassatt, who never married. But it got to a point after her father died that her mom basically forced her, and she just picked the first guy who walked up, which happened to be Manet's brother, which is great. And it was also helpful that Manet's brother, Eugene, was totally fine with her continuing to have an artistic career, which was very rare at that time. Typically, if a woman were to get married in this period, that was their new job. They couldn't do anything else. Okay. So, 1874 shows up. All of these guys, Degas, Manet, Monet, Cézanne, Renoir, they're all talking, they're all kind of figuring out, okay, we really liked what happened with the Salon des Refuses. How can we do that for ourselves? How can we do our own thing? And they've decided to go to their great friend, the photographer Nadar. This is his studio. He really loved himself. Look at that really big sign that lit up, flashed. And they rented out his studio. And they were like, we're just gonna do one night, we're gonna see what happens, we're gonna put our paintings up and, experiment, it'll be great. Degas actually was the one who invited Morisot into the group, which is really great. So she was the first woman to join the Impressionists, and she was in that first exhibition, which is really, really fascinating. Here's the really nondescript catalog cover. They called themselves the Anonymous Society of Artists, Painters, Sculptors, and Engravers. Very vague. Weren't going to let anybody kind of figure out what they were yet. This is a Monet too next to it, which is the view out of Nadar's studio windows. So you can kind of see part of the reason they decided to use Nadar's studio was its central location on the Boulevard des Capucines, which is one of those massively redesigned boulevards in Paris. A lot of foot traffic, which is good, and a lot of natural light with all those windows. And these are some of the paintings that were displayed. So we've got Renoir, Cézanne, Degas, all represented. They're nice, right? Pretty good, pretty good. I have no complaints. This is one of the Monets. I recently discovered this painting on a trip to the National Gallery when they had a show up. I had never seen it before. It's a really weird Monet, but compared to the Manets that we saw earlier, it's pretty similar. So, okay, nobody's gonna freak out about this. But this painting, yeah, I'm hearing a lot of hmms. We all know this, or a lot of us know this painting now. It's called Impression Sunrise. People freaked out when they saw this because they didn't think it was a finished painting. It's very sketchy. And what's great about Monet's work that we know now is that he really was interested in atmospheric effects in his paintings. So here we can see it's a morning on the water with all of this mist, steam, and fog rising up, so you can't really see what's going on. You can kind of make out these figures in a boat here and the masts in the background, but the only thing you really know is there is the sun. This is the painting that named the Impressionist movement. There was a specific critic, Louis Leroy, who wrote a very satirical review, which is ridiculous to read at this point. When you read it, it's just hilarious. But impression, I was certain of it. I was just telling myself that since I was impressed, there had to be some impression in it. And what freedom, what ease of workmanship. A preliminary drawing for a wallpaper pattern is more finished than this seascape. Mic drop Leroy. Yeah, what a sick burn. The joke was on him though, because the Impressionists kind of saw that, they read that, and they were like, all right, yeah, that's what we are. We're the Impressionists. We're gonna own that. And we're gonna become probably one of the most famous artistic groups within art history. So the joke's on Leroy. I also just wanted to throw in this amazing little caricature that says, Impressionist painting, a revolution in painting that is starting to spread alarm, just to showcase just some of the reactions that people would have actually had in the room to seeing Monet's painting, which I think is also just hilarious that anybody would be terrified of a painting like that. It's wild. It's wild stuff. So as I mentioned, Morisot was part of that first exhibition. She also got a really great little critique by Albert Wolff in the Figaro, quote, 5 or 6 lunatics, one of which is a woman, whose feminine grace is maintained amid the outpourings of a delirious mind. Nice. Calm, yeah, we love it. These are the paintings that he thought came from a delirious mind. Her Hide and Seek from 1873 and The Cradle from 1872. You can note too, I think, in these pieces, what he's talking about feminine grace. It's mostly the way that she's handling the paint in these. It's very light and airy, soft strokes, calm almost in the way in which she's applying the pigment, which I think is really, you see that throughout her art and her career. The other thing that's really great about Morisot is she's capturing scenes that the men would not have been privy to. So here, this is an unofficial portrait of her sister, Edma, and her newborn baby, which, I mean, the guys wouldn't have wanted to paint that. It wasn't cool, it wasn't hip, it didn't get them out at the cafes or the bars. Same here with Hide and Seek. You've got this governess playing hide and seek with this little girl in this really beautiful pastoral setting. So yeah, you can see how there's a little bit of a shift already in the way in which we're seeing the men depicting what they're depicting and the women depicting what they're depicting. And at this point, Morisot is the only woman in a room full of men, which is also fascinating that she was brought in at that early stage. But where was Cassatt? Cassatt was American, we know this. She was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and she didn't come to Paris until 1865. When she got to Paris, she attempted the Salon. These are 3 examples of pieces that she got into the Salon. They don't look like what we anticipate Cassatt's looking like, right? They're almost, I don't even know. They're almost Spanish. And I'm not just saying that because you've got a bullfighter over there, but there's like a, what's the word I want to use? Like an old master quality, like a Rembrandt, Rubensy feel in the way in which she's using those dark pigments, really intense shadowing. So in 1868, that was her first time getting something into the Salon. She's feeling great, she's feeling confident. She gets rejected. 1872, awesome, I'm back in it, this is wonderful. A bunch more rejections. And then 1873, she gets one more piece in. At this point, she's getting a little frustrated, feeling a little stifled creatively because she's got to stick within those rigid confinements of the salon. And this is one that's in our exhibition. She paints this in 1874, the year that the Impressionist movement starts. She's not part of that movement yet, but here you can see that she's already loosening up her brushwork. And I really love looking at this piece and thinking of it as like an unofficial self-portrait of Cassatt in 1874. Here is a picture of her. But like, is that not the face of a woman who's just been rejected like 17 times in a row and is just done? Over it. It's the epitome of the French term ennui, of just like, ugh, I can't anymore. Make it stop. Thankfully, a year after she paints this, she is introduced to the work of Edgar Degas. She walks past a shop window that is selling a bunch of his pastels, and there's a quote where she says she basically plasters her face to the glass because she can't get close enough to them. They're so beautiful. She meets Degas a year later, and he starts to kind of take her under his wing. I think this was, yes, good. Couldn't remember, I switched the slide order. They start to hang out together. He's giving her advice on art. They're going to the Louvre together. He starts to draw her and her sister Lydia. And he's drawing her in this very masculine, almost confident way, which doesn't quite jive with a woman who's just been rejected 17 times, but that's kind of how and who Cassatt was. She was basically described by any Parisian who met her as the loud, tall, brash American who just kind of walked into a room, potentially holding that umbrella very confidently. Sorry, I don't know why I had to do that anyway. Anyway, a few years after that, Degas invites Cassatt to join the Impressionist movement, and she starts exhibiting in 1879 with the group. Before that happens, though, there are two other exhibitions, 76 and 78, or 77. They skipped 78. That was the year that Morisot got married and had her first child. So she was not part of the fourth exhibition. But we've got Mary Cassatt, which is pretty awesome. Cassatt's debut came in the form of this beautiful, beautiful painting that I wish I could have gotten on loan, but it was already committed elsewhere. A little girl in a blue armchair, which took Paris by storm. They were fascinated by the way in which she was depicting this little girl at leisure. You can imagine this girl was brought along while her parents were paying a social call and just was done. She wanted to go home. She wanted to go play in the park. She was over it. So she's just basically melting into that chair while this little dog is sleeping soundly. I love it. It's just so good. The textures, the way that she's depicting the silk on those chairs, oh, it's so good. When Cassatt started exhibiting with the Impressionists, she wrote a letter to a friend where she says, "At last I could work with total independence. Without worrying about the opinion of a jury, I started living." That's pretty telling about how stifled she felt in that salon system, in that academic rigor. She just couldn't do what she wanted to do. And now she just felt that entire weight lift off of her shoulders, and she's able to create pieces like this and this. In the 79 exhibition, she and Degas were singled out in a kind of, backhanded way about how they kind of were the only two that really distinguished themselves. They offered some attraction and some excuse in pretentious show of window dressing and infantile daubing. And I figured, it'd be kind of fun to see what the infantile daubing they were talking about was. What? I'm sorry. That's probably one of the most famous Monet paintings at the Met. Infantile daubing. Okay. A wonderful Degas, and then a work by Gustave Caillebotte. Caillebotte is an interesting guy because he was independently wealthy and he actually funded most of the exhibitions, which is pretty great for the Impressionists. What's really interesting to look at, and I didn't talk about it yet. What's really interesting to look at when we look at Cassatt, Morisot, and the other Impressionists is the worlds in which they were able to exist within their art. These are three examples of pieces by Degas and then Caillebotte that showcased kind of the things that the men were able to do, where the men were able to go. So we've got a woman here drinking absinthe in a cafe late at night. Cassatt and Morisot were not allowed to go out and paint that because probably that woman was a prostitute and that would not have looked good in the society eye. Again, Degas, the client, that depicts the interior of a brothel. They wouldn't have gone there. They wouldn't have been allowed to go there. And then Caillebotte, putting the butt in Caillebotte. She would not have been able to paint that. They would not have been able to paint that. That was a big no-no, especially for a married woman and an unmarried woman to attempt. So they were able to kind of do their own spin, so to speak. So for example, here we've got the Degas next to Morisot's young girl in a ball gown, both depicting women outside in society, out of their homes, but in very different ways, right? Here she's kind of being very prim and proper in her ball gown, seated. I totally didn't mean to have her looking directly over there, but it works. So she's, this is acceptable. This would not have been. Very interesting, very cool. A little compare and contrast. I have another one, don't worry. So again, two scenes that Morisot would have been able to paint. This is her maid in her home, and this is a woman at her toilette, not nude. She is dressed, so that is okay. Compare and contrast. The same subject, so to speak, both people getting ready at their toilette, but very different applications, very different worlds. Socially acceptable for a woman to paint, only a man could do that. Does that make sense? Awesome. Cassatt did that too. Wow, look at this. Oh God, I'm so sorry. Anyway, these are two women. This one on the right is by Renoir. This is by Cassatt, both out at the opera. Very different paintings. Renoir is depicting what we would refer to in French society as a coquette, which is, the rough translation is like a little hen, or what we would call today like the side chick. So this is this man's mistress, dressed to the nines because she's there to be seen, to attract additional clientele, fully made up and all of that makeup that probably caused her to have an untimely death, who knows. And what's interesting here is she's looking out at us. She's inviting us to look at her while her date is looking elsewhere. He is looking for his next conquest. Meanwhile, in Cassatt's painting, we've got the woman here doing the looking. She is in the act of looking. She has agency. She's not just an object to be ogled. She is doing the ogling, which is really interesting to think about, especially when you think about this period in terms of women's suffrage and the right to vote and all of that struggle. Cassatt was a big advocate for women's suffrage in the United States. So the fact that she was already talking and looking and painting women as subjects and not objects, people and not window dressings, is very, very important. I also just love the inclusion of this guy he could be this man, perched very precariously over that loge box, staring her down, and she's just like not even looking, not going to acknowledge him. That's such a good painting. So Cassatt and Morisot really rose to the top of the Impressionist group. Some people call them the matriarchs. I hate that term because it makes them sound like old crones. But they really were these two pillars within that group that really helped to rally the troops, bring in money, help to organize things. They kept things moving in a really wonderful way. And they started to really get some really good, positive press. Charles Ephrussi in the Gazette de Beaux Arts in 1880 writes, quote, "Morisot grinds flower petals onto her palette, later to spread them on her canvas in witty, airy touches, thrown a little haphazardly." Still a little, they had to do a little bit of a neg, but it's fine. And Durand Ruel, who was one of the big dealers in Paris at the time, wrote of Cassatt, "Her work is so great that she paints in a school she has created for herself," which is pretty high praise. The final exhibition of the Impressionists took place in 1886. It featured Cassatt and Morisot, but it also featured, for the first time ever, pointillism and the post-impressionists starting to kind of weasel their way in there. So these are 3 examples of paintings. We've got a beautiful piece by Cassatt, a beautiful Morisot, and then this fascinating painting by Georges Seurat. If anybody went to the Glimmerglass Opera this summer, you may have seen Sunday in the Park with George. This is the painting that is based off of. Seurat and the pointillists kind of emerged onto the scene, and when I say pointillism, I mean the way in which they're applying the paint is just in tiny little dots. They're not mixing their colors, they're letting, your eye mixes it for you. It's very scientific, yes. Anyway, so there was an entire room in this exhibition in 1886 that was dedicated to pointillism, with this painting taking up one whole wall. So it's a very interesting moment in which you're seeing kind of Impressionism fading, but making way for these newer modes of depiction, which is really interesting and fascinating. It's such a fascinating period in art history because all of these things are happening in a relatively quick period of time. I mean, we're talking 1874 to 86. You've already gone through Impressionism and you're going off. Van Gogh is starting to do things down in Arles. Hasn't chopped his ear off yet, but that's coming. Anyway, sorry, I go off on many tangents in this. Cassatt was probably the most important figure when it came to bringing Impressionism to America. She became very good friends with a woman named Louisine Havemeyer, who gave quite a bit of art to the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Shelburne Museum in Vermont. This is Cassatt's portrait of Louisine and her daughter Electra. Incredible name. Maybe not the most flattering portrait, but that's how she looked. This is one of the Cassatts that she owned and gifted to the Met. And she really looked to Cassatt to advise her on what art she should be buying, what artists she should be bringing to America. So just a smattering of them. Here's just a few highlights. We got Monet, we got Degas, Monet, Renoir, Manet, Cezanne, Puvis de Chavannes, Pissarro, another Pissarro, just a ton of art that is just now in New York City, which is incredible. Interestingly, she never got Louisine to purchase Morisot. We're not totally sure why. Part of me thinks it's because Morisot had her own thing going on and she didn't really have as many paintings as Cassatt and the other Impressionists to kind of get out into society. She was very much a self-editor, so a lot of the work that she created, she ended up destroying, which sucks. But those that survive are incredible works, and mostly in France, unfortunately. So, 1890 comes around, and there is a massive exhibition of Japanese prints at the École des Beaux-Arts, and we actually have documentation of Morisot and Cassatt making plans to go and see those prints together, which is pretty incredible. It's kind of the whole thing that made the show happen upstairs. So one of the letters, she says, we could go see their Japanese prints at the Beaux-Arts. Seriously, you must not miss that. You who want to make color prints, you couldn't dream of anything more beautiful. These are 2 works that we have upstairs in the exhibition, both of which we can see the influence of Japanese art and of Morisot on Cassatt and Cassatt on Morisot. So the one on the left here, Peasant Girl Among Tulips, is really fascinating to me because it's a period in which Cassatt and Morisot, they went and saw this show together, but they were also living only 10 miles from one another. So there was a lot of overlap and opportunity for the 2 of them to exchange ideas, paint together, learn from one another. And we see here, this very loose brushwork in the Morisot piece that is then echoed in the Cassatt from just a few years later. And again, the Cassatt too, the influence of Japanese prints and the way in which the water is going all the way up that composition. There is no horizon line, it's just water. There's no way to enter the painting. If we think about it like a window, you would just kind of hit your face on water if you tried. Don't try if you go upstairs. We don't want to clean the glass on the painting. And I just love that one little duck. It's just so good. So the exhibition inspired Morisot to start to experiment with etched media. She didn't know anything about etching. Cassatt had started to dabble. This is an example of one of Cassatt's etchings upstairs. These are two Morisots. Cassatt was doing original compositions in her etchings, whereas Morisot was kind of taking pages from her sketchbook just to kind of figure out the different techniques involved, because etching was very complicated. It required, you would have a copper plate, like so, and you would have a ruby's-tipped stylus that you're basically sketching, etching your lines directly into that stylus, into that plate. So it's very complicated, because then you would have to do different acid baths to kind of get your lines just right. So chemicals were involved. Then you would have to figure out how to properly apply your ink and press it just right so that you're getting a good impression. Get it? Impressionism? Anyway, so it's just a really interesting moment. And we also know from documentation that Morisot was going to Cassatt's home studio to learn how to do this, which I think is really cool, to see two women in this period teaching and learning from one another. Unlike Morisot, Cassatt went on to really excel in colored etchings. She figured out the process. Probably she was the best out of all of the Impressionists at doing this, in which she was able to do these different colored hues and inks and apply them in just the right way to create these really fascinating finished products that really do look like Japanese prints. She was basing this series, this was her series of 8, off of a print series that she had seen in Japanese art, in which it was a woman, women's realms, but she's making them distinctly Parisian, which is pretty cool. All right, we're almost done, I promise. In 1890, Morisot was quoted saying, "I am approaching the end of my life, and yet I am still a mere beginner," which is kind of spooky because at this point, she's like 50 years old. She passed away in 1895. So it's almost like she was anticipating her death in that way. This painting, which is upstairs, is entitled the Mozart Sonata. It was painted the year before she passed away, and it depicts her daughter, Julie, playing the violin while her daughter's cousin, Jeanne, is accompanying her on the piano. So it's a painting of a mother's pride, and it's very spooky and kind of sad when you think about the fact that she really only lived one more year after she painted this. That's another reason why there are not as many works by Morisot out there. She was a self-editor, but she also died at the age of 53, whereas Cassatt lived to be 82. Kind of not fair. But she passed away because she contracted pneumonia from her daughter, Julie. Julie was sick. Morisot decided to nurse her back to health like a good mother would, and she died, which left Julie orphaned at the age of 16. Yeah, not great. But thankfully, Julie and her mother had such close relationship with all of the Impressionists that they all stepped up to help raise her, which I think is really poignant and beautiful. Julie ended up working with Degas and the other Impressionists to organize Morisot's memorial exhibition the year after she passed away in 1896. These are a few examples of the pieces that were included in that exhibition, and it was attended by everybody, including Cassatt, which I think is very nice, very beautiful, very kind. Cassatt, on the other hand, as I mentioned, she lived to be 82. She continued to paint up until 1914, when she couldn't paint anymore because her eyesight failed her. She went blind, which I feel like is always just the most depressing thing to hear about an artist having to stop because they either go blind or they lose the ability to use their hands. Ugh, it sucks. Anyway, what's really great about Cassatt's work, and what I tried to talk about within the exhibition upstairs too, is the shift in her techniques between 1890 and the 1900s, so after Morisot's passing. In the period in which she and Morisot were interacting, you see a lot more of these unfinished compositions that are very indicative of the influence of Morisot, who leaves many areas of her canvases with raw edges or bare of pigment. Here too, we can see the way in which she would start her figures with these dark blue sketches and then fill them in with the rest of the paint. But then when you jump into the 1900s in her works, the brushwork is a lot more tight in the faces and the way in which she is depicting. There's still a little bit of looseness in the way that she's depicting garments, but it's much, much different than her earlier works, which I think is really interesting. As I mentioned, she stopped producing art in the 19-teens because she lost her ability to see, but that didn't mean that she stopped doing anything altogether. She actually donated in 1914 18 paintings to an exhibition in New York City that was being put on to benefit the women. She was helping to fund that movement. That was probably one of the last things that she actually did in her career. God, that's such a bummer note to end on, but that's the end of the talk. Do we have any questions? Have I confused everybody? No. Okay, good. Very good. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you went about collecting the pieces that are in the exhibit and how you managed to get them from the different locations?
Sure. Yeah, so as Kevin mentioned, the show took 3 years to create. The initial step anytime you do a loan show like this is you reach out to museums with basically what I like to call them my feeler emails, where I'm just like, hey, I'm putting on this show, any interest? If I send you a letter, will you say yes? And I'll either get a response of, no, that's committed somewhere, or yeah, maybe, send your stuff. So it was a lot of that. I did a lot of research. The first year of putting this show together was mostly research, trying to figure out the object list, what I wanted, my backups, who I needed to befriend, who I needed to beg, who I needed to visit and beg. Yeah, it was a lot of begging. One example is the piece from the MFA, because I knew that they have a lot of Cassatts, but they don't like to lend them, so we had to kind of broker a deal with them and they're going to borrow one of our pieces next year so that we could have this year type of thing. So it's a lot of politics. Yeah, politics. Yeah.
So movement follows movement. I mean, Impressionism was followed by Post-Impressionism. What led Impressionism to fade away? I mean, they were a lot of the rejects, and then they were the premier artists, and then obviously, what made it fade? To get that word up?
It was shifting taste. That's always what it ends up being. They came at the exact right time. I like to think about how I don't think Impressionism would have happened in Paris if it hadn't been for this is totally random, this goes into my master's dissertation, so sorry. But I like to trace Impressionism back to the rich caricature tradition in France, because again, you've got distortion and exaggeration happening, which then you see again in Impressionist paintings in the way that they're distorting and exaggerating to get those effects of atmosphere, the way in which Renoir does his almost filtered feather-like paintings, even the way in which Cassatt is manufacturing these tender moments, this exaggerated tenderness. So it's a shifting taste, and I think that at that same time when you've got Post-Impressionism starting, you also have Matisse coming into play and the Fauve movement, in which they're really playing around with color in ways that the Impressionists hadn't done before. So you're seeing these really bright, shocking paintings, and when you put them up next to the Impressionist works, they just kind of faded into the background. And then, of course, Picasso comes into the play, and yeah, it's Picasso. What are you going to do?
But it also it's more than a movement. I mean, it's a style now, too.
Yes.
I mean, you see a lot of people who do art that it seems that they are painting a la Impressionism. So it went beyond just being a movement.
Right. No, you still see it today. It's incredible. Yeah. And I just had a really good thought and it just disappeared. Shoot. Anyway, any other questions? Yeah.
So this took 3 years in the making. So what can we expect from you 3 years from now?
Very good question. I am in the very, very early stages of a William Merritt Chase exhibition in which we're going to focus. Basically what we're doing in the next few years with exhibitions that I'm doing are we're taking works from our Masterworks collection, so one piece, and I'm building a show around that. So we're going to take Our Lady in White and build a show around her, which includes costumes and all sorts of Gilded Age fun. Yeah.
Did this transfer of culture from Paris here trigger a form of Impressionism here?
Oh, yeah.
And are we reversing this now? What are they interested in abroad? What do they want from us? Well, you had to give them a pound of flesh from us.
Oh, God. Oh, God. You know, I don't know because they kind of have everything. But for the first part of your question, yes, there were other Americans who came to Paris and saw these techniques and brought them back. Childe Hassam, for example, was one of those artists. We've got 2 works by him upstairs. Theodore Earl Butler was another. He came to France and decided he just wanted to learn from Monet, so he camped out in Monet's backyard until he allowed him to learn at his feet, and then ended up marrying his stepdaughters to get into the family, and there you go. But yeah, there's so much overlap there. And then when you think about, God, I almost want to say like they might want some of the kinetic works that we produced in America in like the 1950s and 60s, like the Alexander Calders and all of that, because those are just so good. And I can't think of anything quite as good. And I've seen those in European collections as like big pieces where they like do a whole gallery around them. But aside from that, I don't know. Any other questions? Yeah.
Marie Cassatt was never married, right?
No.
How did she live? How did she afford that lifestyle and take the time to create all that, where the other was married and...
Well, it helps that Cassatt's parents were very wealthy. Her brother, too, he ended up being one of the big wigs on the Philadelphia Railroad, so he kind of also helped to, buy paintings from her. That would help to supplement her income. But again, she also was heavily marketing herself. You can tell in some of the depictions that Degas does of her where she's like if she came into a room and you were the gallery owner, you wouldn't want to say no to her. So she was very, very good at brokering deals, getting paintings placed, getting money from those paintings, doing commissioned pieces in order to bring in money. Her parents moved to Paris with her 3 or 4 years after she did. So they all lived together, so they also helped pay the rent, which is also pretty helpful. But yeah, she was just really good at marketing herself. Yeah.
How did the work we are looking at get to the Fenimore? Who had the foresight to buy it here?
That one?
Yes.
Oh, that's a good story. So some of you have heard this before. So we started our American Masterworks initiative in 2023. We were approached by the Thaw Charitable Trust, who'd said that they heard that I was doing this show, and we had just acquired like a really teeny tiny Cassatt work on paper that was weirdly cheap. I'm still pinching myself that we bought that. But they heard about that and they said, your fine art collection hasn't had a major gift to it since Stephen Clark's initial gifting of the museum and his collection in the 1950s. We want to help you, which was wild. We didn't know what that meant until the first piece we purchased, which was a Georgia O'Keeffe, and then we were like, oh, okay, this is a lot of money. So we ended up acquiring 27 pieces between 2023 and 2024. The Cassatt we purchased right before Christmas in 2023. I had been reaching out to different galleries and auction houses to let them know that we were looking for a Cassatt, trying to figure out just the right one, because there are some that are really good and some that are like the portrait of Louisine Havemeyer. And I had been sent this one, I think, that October, and I passed it on to my supervisor, And he was like, yeah, it's okay, but we'll keep looking, just in case. We'll see what else is out there. That December, we were at Sotheby's we were looking at something in a private viewing room. We were getting ready for the Americana week that they do in January. And I mentioned to them right before I left to get on my train, if you know of any Cassatts, that's something we're definitely interested in. And they whispered to each other and said, we might have one, but we'd have to check and we wouldn't be able to show it to you today. And I was like, all right. So I left. My boss takes my place, and as I'm waiting in line in Moynihan Train Hall, he texts me a picture of this and goes, did you see this? In all caps. And I'm like, no, I didn't. They were saving that for you, apparently. And he just goes, we're buying it. And I was like, great. That's the one I wanted us to buy in October. So that's kind of how that happened. And it's great. If you buy the catalog, I wrote a really great essay on this painting and who the woman is, because when we first got it, the title was Madame H. de Fleury and her child, and I didn't know who that was, and I had to go through the French genealogical websites, which are very confusing, and determine there is no Madame H. de Fleury. So, buy the catalog to learn more. Yeah.
Are there a lot of reproduced etchings? Are there still plates available that they're looking for?
There are a couple Cassatt plates that are still out there. There was a moment, like towards the end of her life, where she thought she found a bunch of plates that hadn't been produced before and started to print, had people printing off of them, and then Louisine had to come in and be like, please stop, you're making everything like worth less because you're making too many editions. But typically we have canceled plates that you'll see. Those two don't. There's a couple of the Morisot pieces upstairs that you'll see the two dots that are cancellation marks that were done to limit the run, but those then they got approval by the family to reprint them. So another art dealer, Ambrose Foulard, reprinted those in the early 1900s. Yeah.
There's a very nice Cassatt pastel in the Arkel.
Yes.
They don't bring it out much because
Yeah.
it's so light sensitive, but it's quite nice.
Yeah, I wanted that one. They said no. Which I get. It's very fragile. Pastels are much harder to get on loan because it's just dust on a piece of paper. And if you're shipping dust on a piece of paper, do you really want to be shipping dust on a piece of paper? No. Any other questions? Yeah.
So after seeing the exhibit upstairs, I was taken by the fact that Cassatt's sister died at quite a young age, right?
Mm-hmm.
And everything I've ever read about Cassatt, she was, as you pointed out, a very kind of tough individual, not one to be emotionally exposing themselves. And how did her sister's death affect her?
Oof.
And professionally as well?
I honestly think that might have been something that bonded her and Morisot. Morisot had a sister. She didn't pass away, but there was some distance created when her sister got married that never kind of got resolved due to the fact that when her sister married, her sister was also an artist, and when her sister married, she gave it all up, and Morisot was very upset about that, and they never really were the same after that. So I think that there was a little bit of a bonding moment there between the two of them, and the idea of this separation, this loss of somebody who had been so close to them. In the painting that you're talking about upstairs, which hopefully you all will go upstairs and look at, you'll also notice how the bottom half of that, the brushwork, is very aggressive. I like to think about how that piece was painted around the time that her sister died. So it's unfinished, but we see potentially her working through her grief in that painting and the way in which she is just attacking that canvas. It's one interpretation. I think it's a good interpretation. Okay, great. Well, thank you all for coming.